Okay, so it's time to go ahead and begin. So before I forget, up on the sideboard, we're going to determine the groups today. Remember, Lab 0, you'll be able to do all of Lab 0 after today's class, and that's due Monday of next week. So, like I mentioned last time, if there's somebody in the class that you want to work with, just at some point before we start the last portion, which is going to be the last hour of the class, just write both last names by the group number that you want to speak. So if you got a favorite number up there, it should be your favorite number. Otherwise, if you don't put your names up there, I'm just going to randomly assign people. Okay, so by the end of class today, you're going to know what group you're in for the lab. Okay, so this is the agenda today. We're going to talk a little bit about bits and then logic gates, and then basically from two table down through the end here is one big example. Okay, show you various forms of representing digital information. Okay. Each table could have two handouts that we're going to refer to. This handout here that has a bunch of moving algebra identities along with the logic gates. And then there's this handout that just has a picture of a circuit that I'm just going to briefly talk about. Again, there's no circuits in this talk, but occasionally I like to just talk a little about circuits and how it relates to what we're doing here with digital. Okay. So the first thing is, we talked last time about number bases, and one of the number bases that's important in the digital world is binary, where the characters are either 0 or 1. And I mentioned last time that we call, when you have either a 0 or 1, we call that a bit. And I just want to talk a little bit about bits to get it hopefully some more tangible meaning, because when you have a digital circuit, it's not like in that circuit there's 0 and 1 numbers. Okay. What 0 refers to is 0 volts. Okay, it refers to a voltage level 0 that's in this digital circuit. And what a 1 refers to most commonly, is some plus amount of voltage, and a lot of times that plus voltage is 5 volts. Okay, so 0 and 1, they're just shorthand for a voltage value. And these are ideal values. Okay. Now I know some of you, because I know probably like half the class I think are EE majors this quarter, and I know if you're an EE major, your first quarter you take that EE 151 class, that lab that kind of orients you to some EE circuits, and you make some measurements in that lab, correct? Right? Voltage measurements. Like, how many people have made a voltage measurement? Okay, about half the class, which is, I figured, because the CPEs haven't had any circuits yet, but the EEs have. Well, those of you that have made a voltage measurement, when you make that voltage measurement and you go to read the display on the voltmeter, is that display a nice steady value, or does it fluctuate some? Yeah, it fluctuates, right? I mean, it fluctuates at least a little bit. And that's because in a circuit, when you put voltage to it, that voltage will produce current. Okay, it's a force to get the charges to move that gets the current going. And when you got current flowing in a circuit, components heat up, and when they heat up, their resistance changes. And when the resistance changes, the amount of current from changes, and that changes the voltage across them. And it goes back and forth. It's sort of like an equilibrium thing until it reaches sort of like an equilibrium temperature. So because voltage will fluctuate, in actuality, this is the ideal. In actuality, we'll say that a 0 is when you have a voltage that's below a certain amount of voltage. And a lot of times it's 1.4 volts, right? So in your digital circuit, if you have a voltage less than 1.4 volts, we call that a 0. And if that voltage is above 1.4 volts, well, then we call it a 1. Okay. Again, I'm not going to test you on any of this, but I think it's good to know because, again, these zeros and ones, they refer to actual tangible things like voltage, things you can measure. Okay, the other thing about bits, zeros and ones that I wanted to talk about right up front is that, we talked about, the binary code base 2, where the zeros and ones are representing a number, like each bit has numerical value. But what gives those bits numerical value is the circuitry around those voltages, around those zeros and ones. Like zeros and ones don't inherently have numerical value. It's the designer that gives the bits whatever value or whatever they're going to represent. So, zeros and ones, they can represent numbers, they can represent letters, they can represent color, they can represent sound, they can represent pixels on a video screen. Zeros and ones can represent anything, right? It's the designer who decides what these bits are going to represent. Okay? Okay, the other thing about bits that's important is how many values you can represent with a certain number of bits. So if I just have one bit, well, that one bit can either be 0 or 1. So with one bit, I can only represent two things. If I have 2 bits, well, both those bits could be 0 at the same time, or this bit could be 0 and this could be a 1 at the same time, or this bit could be 1 and this bit could be 0 at the same time, or both bits could be 1 at the same time. So if I have 2 bits, I can represent 4 different values, right? I have 4 unique combinations of 0 and 1. Okay, if I have 3 bits, well, if I have 3 bits, I could have these combinations. I could have all zeros. I could have 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, 4, 6, 8. With 3 bits, I could get 8 values. So do you see a pattern? 1 bit, 2 values. 2 bits, 4 values. 3 bits, 8 values. How many values do you think we can represent with 4 bits? 16, 5 bits. 32, 6 bits. 64. See, every time you add a bit, you double the number of values that you can represent with that number of bits. So a relationship that you want to devote to memory, at least at start, because if you take enough digital classes, this is just going to get ingrained in your head. But an important relationship that you want to know is that 2 to the number of bits equals the number of values. Right? So 1 bit, 2 values, 2 bits, 4 values, 3 bits, 8 values, 4 bits, 16 values, and so on. Okay? So do you have any questions up to this point? Everybody following okay? All right, the next thing is to talk about logic gates. And this is where this handout is a good reference, okay? Because part of what's on this handout are some of the gates we're going to talk about. We're going to actually talk about 2 other gates that aren't on this handout, but we're going to start with the ones on this handout. The other information on this handout are different laws and identities of Boolean algebra. Boolean is a person's name, and Boolean algebra is just base 2 algebra, right? You've learned base 10 algebra. Well, there's base 2 algebra. If you look at those laws and identities, you'll see that some of the laws, like the associated law, is the same. Base 2 and base 10, some of the laws are the same. But there are some laws in Boolean algebra that are particular to base 2. Now, we're not going to go over all those. In fact, today we're just going to look at one called De Morgan's. But throughout the quarter, we'll come back occasionally to this. I don't think we'll cover every single one this quarter, but we'll cover some additional ones, later on. But today we're going to talk about De Morgan in a little bit. Okay. But anyway, let's start talking about logic gates. Okay, so the first logic gate that we're going to talk about is the NOT gate. okay, which is also called an inverter. And the NOT gate has this symbol. It's an arrow with a little bubble. This is the input side of the symbol. And this is the output side. It typically will label inputs and outputs of digital gates with letters. So for example, I might call this input A. And the way we would express the output of an inverter is we would take whatever we call the input and put a bar over it. Okay. This bar is part of the symbols of Boolean algebra. Okay, in Boolean algebra, that bar over a variable, whether it's an input or an output, it means not. Okay, so we would say, input A, output not A, and not means opposite of. Okay, so at the output of a NOT gate or an inverter, you're always going to get the opposite of what's at the input. Right? And since this is a gate, a digital device, well, the signals are bits. Right? So our input is either a 0 or 1, and our output is either a 0 or 1. Now, each gate has a truth table. And truth tables show you the relationship between the output and input, or inputs if you have more than one input. Here we only have one input. And by convention, we put inputs on the left side of the truth table, and we put outputs on the right side of the truth table. So if I make my input 0 to the NOT gate, I'm going to get a 1 out. And if the input to the NOT gate is 1, I'm going to get a 0 out. And you always get the opposite of what you put into a NOT gate. Okay? So any questions about the NOT gate? So there's no case where we'll get the opposite. Correct. Yep. I mean, if you're getting something different than the opposite out of a NOT gate, then that NOT gate is not any good. There's a defect. Okay. All right. The next gate, AND gate. Okay, the AND gate has this symbol. And in Boolean algebra, the way that you can show that two inputs are ANDed together is you can just write it as AB like that. Or sometimes you'll see it where there's a dot. Okay, so whether there's a dot there or not, this would be output F equals A ANDed with B. Okay. If you look on that handout, above the truth table for the AND gate, it says logical multiplication. Okay, the reason it says that is because this looks like multiplication in base 10. Okay, but multiplication is not happening here. Okay, ANDing is happening. And I'm going to show you in the truth table what's meant by ANDing. Okay, but it's called logical multiplication because if you were to think of this as a base 10 equation, well, it looks like A and B are being multiplied. Okay, so the truth table for an AND gate, let me see if my other balloon is a little bit better than this one. This one's running out here. Oh yeah, no one's better. All right, so there's two inputs. So because I have two inputs where each input can either be a 0 or 1, how many combinations can I get here? How many values if I get two inputs? 4. Right, then both inputs could be 0, or it could be 0, 1, 1, 0, 1. All right, well, an AND gate will output a 1 only when all the inputs are 1. Okay, we're only going to get a 1 out when both inputs are 1. For all other combinations of inputs, we're going to get 0. And this is a 2-input AND gate, but you can get a 3-input AND gate, a 4-input AND gate, an 8-input AND gate, a 16-input AND gate. And no matter how many inputs you have, all those inputs would have to be a 1 to get a 1 out. If just one of those inputs is a 0, you're going to get a 0 out. Okay. All right. So any questions on the AND gates? All right. Let's go on to the OR gates. Okay. The OR gate has this symbol. Look. Okay. So you see the OR gate has a curvy side where the inputs are, where the AND gate's got a flat vertical. Okay, in Boolean algebra, the OR symbol is the plus sign. Okay, so you see this would be output F is A or B. Now, it's called logical addition. And the reason why it's called the logical addition is because if you were to look at this as a base 10 equation, well, it looks like you're adding A and B. But again, addition is not happening here. ORing is happening. Okay. And what ORing means can be shown in the truth table. See, with an OR gate, you'll get a 1 out as long as at least one of the inputs is a 1. The only time you get a 0 out of an OR gate is when all the inputs are 0. Okay, so you see that's what the truth table of an OR gate would look like. And again, this is true whether you have 2 inputs, 3 inputs, 4 inputs, or umpteen hundred inputs. Okay. So any questions up to this point? So these are the gates that are on that handout, but now I'm going to show you 2 more gates. Okay, these 2 that I'm going to show you now are not on that handout. Okay, so there's also a NAND gate. Okay, NAND stands for not AND. And the symbol for a NAND gate looks like this. So compare the NAND gate symbol to the AND gate symbol. What's different between these 2 symbols? A little bubble, right? See, this one has a little bubble on the output where that one doesn't, right? The AND gate doesn't. Well, the reason why that little bubble is there is because a NAND gate is equivalent to an AND with an inverter on the output. Right? You take an AND and invert the output, and it's equivalent to a NAND. So you see that little bubble is the bubble of this inverter. It's to remind us that, hey, the NAND is just like an AND, but the output's inverted. Okay? The truth table for a NAND is going to have an inverted output compared to the AND. So, like we said before, an AND will only give a 1 out when all the inputs are 1. A NAND only gives a 0 out when all the inputs are equal 1. An AND, you'll get a 0 as long as at least one of the inputs is a 0. With a NAND, you'll get a 1 as long as at least one of the inputs is a 0. So you see, the output of the NAND is just opposite the output of the AND. And that's because of that inverter. Okay? Now in Boolean, the way a NAND Boolean equation looks like is first A and B are ANDed. So you see here at the output of this AND gate is A ANDed with B. Then A ANDed with B is all inverted. So you see what that would look like in Boolean is A and B ANDed together, the whole thing inverted. Okay, so that's the Boolean expression for a NAND. Okay? Now, the other handout that's on your table, this shows the circuitry for a 2-input NAND. Okay, and again, you're not going to get tested on circuits, but the reason I provide this handout is because these symbols, all these symbols of all these logic gates represent actual circuits. You know, sometimes people can get kind of lost in the abstraction, so to speak. You know, they start thinking that these symbols are somehow magical or something. But these symbols are just representing real circuits. And this is just one way to make a NAND gate. There's other circuitry that you can use to make a NAND gate. So this symbol is representing this circuit, right? So, instead of writing this circuit every time we have a NAND gate, we just write the symbol instead because it's easier, right? Okay, and then, there's a circuit for an OR gate, there's a circuit for an AND gate, there's a circuit for an inverter. Okay, when you take your semiconductor classes, the EEs, I think you don't take your electronics until your junior year. The new CPE students on the new catalog, I believe you start getting some electronics your sophomore year. But in those classes, you'll start learning about what these symbols represent, how they operate. Like this symbol here, the main component of a logic gate is called a transistor. Okay, and it's working like a switch. Then you got some diodes over here, which is semiconductor device. Then you got some resistors, which you learn about resistors the first day of a circuits 1 class. Okay, but this is all circuits. See, that circuit gives this truth table. Okay, provides these voltage levels at the output when you get these voltage levels at the input. Okay, so we got NOT gate, AND gate, OR gate, NAND gate. What do you think is coming next? NOR gate, exactly. There's a NOR gate. Okay, NOR gate is short for NOR is short for not OR. And the symbol for a NOR gate looks like this. And a NOR gate is equivalent to an OR gate with an inverter on the output. The truth table for an OR gate is going to be what we had for the OR, but with the output inverted. So an OR gate, you get a 1 out as long as at least one input is a 1. NOR gate, you get a 0 out as long as one input is equal to a 1. And with an OR gate, you only get a 0 out when both inputs are 0. With the NOR gate, you only get a 1 out when both inputs are 0. And so again, you see if you compare the output of the NOR, excuse me, with the output of the OR, it's just got an inverted output. In Boolean algebra, this ORs A and B together. So at the output of this OR gate, we have A or B. And then the inverter inverts the whole thing. So in Boolean algebra, that's what a NOR gate equation looks like. A and B OR together, the whole thing inverted. Okay? So any questions about anything up to this point? These are the 5 basic gates. Okay, using these gates, you can make other gate. Well, there's actually 2 other gates. One's called exclusive OR, and the other's called exclusive NOR. We'll talk about those next week. Okay, and then also all digital devices, whatever they are. We're going to talk about at least a half a dozen different digital devices, things like counters and comparators, adders. And they all come back to this. They all come back to these logic functions, logic gates. Okay, so we're done with gates. So now we're going to look at an example that involves a truth table along with all these other topics that we have here. Okay, so I'm going to leave the NAND gate and the NOR gate up there, but I'm going to erase everything else unless somebody has a question about something that is over here. Nobody has a question. Erase all this. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, a truth table will show you all the outputs for all possible combinations. So, that's what those truth tables for the logic gates are doing. Okay. But you can create a truth table for any particular situation or problem. So I'm going to create a truth table here, and I'm going to use these variables, and I'll explain why I'm using these particular variables coming up. But I'm going to use variables C, D, and S. These are inputs, right? But remember, inputs go on the left side of a truth table. And then outputs go on the right side, and I'm gonna have a single output that I'm gonna label E. So first of all, since I have 3 inputs, right, where again, each input can either be a 0 or a 1, how many combinations can I have? How many values if I have 3 bits? If each input's a bit, so, right, very good, 8, thank you. The person with the 8 fingers up gets the prize. Right, since they could all be 0, or it could have 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1. Right, so 2, 4, 6, 8. And notice, when I wrote these combinations of inputs here, I put them in binary order, right? Because if we were to consider these inputs as binary numbers, I'm going 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, and that's typically what is done. When you have a truth table, you always put your inputs in binary order. Okay. Okay, well, the reason why I have C for this input is because C stands for chips. Okay, like tortilla chips. G stands for eggs. And S stands for salsa. And then E is eat. Okay, so we're gonna make a truth table based on my appetite, okay, my taste buds. Now, of course, your truth table might be something different, okay, but this is gonna be my truth table. Although the first row of all our truth tables will be the same, right? Because if it's a 0, it means you don't have it, and if it's a 1, it means you do have it. So here in the first row, we don't have any chips, we don't have any eggs, we don't have any salsa. So if you don't have anything to eat, right? E is going to be 0. We don't have anything to eat, so that's going to be 0. Okay, well, I'm not a fan of just eating salsa itself, okay? So I would not eat just salsa by itself. Eggs by themselves, of course, very good. I love eggs. Eggs and salsa, one of the best breakfasts. I love eggs and salsa. Like scrambled eggs with salsa is like one of the best things. How many people like eggs and salsa? Yeah, good, very good. If you haven't tried it, you got to try it. It's great. Just tortilla chips plain. I like those. Of course, chips and salsa. Not a fan of chips and eggs. And not a fan of putting chips with my eggs and salsa. Okay, so you see the truth table here is showing what our output would be for each combination of input. Okay. All right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to write an SOP, okay, which stands for sum of products. That's M. Okay, SOP, sum of products, Boolean equation. Okay, we're going to get this SOP equation right from the truth table. And we're first going to write this equation just for output E. Okay, so output E is when E is equal to 1. So I'm going to write all the input combinations where E is equal to 1. You know, the combinations that I would actually eat. Okay, and wherever there's a 0, we're going to put a not over that input because we don't have it. And wherever there's a 1, we're not going to put a not over it because we have it. So you see, looking at this row right here, I don't have any chips, so I'm going to put not C. I have eggs, so that's just G. I don't have salsa. Okay, see, not chips and eggs and not salsa, I'm going to eat. Or I would eat not chips, eggs, salsa. See, that comes from this row of the truth table. And if I make a mistake, let me know. Sometimes I forget to put a bar, that it should be a bar. But keep an eye on what I'm doing here. Okay, or I would eat having chips, no eggs, no salsa. Right, that would be that row. Or I would eat having chips, no eggs, and having salsa, right? That would be this. Okay, so you see, this is called the SOP, the sum of products for output heat, right? It's coming right from the truth table. We're just writing each term for where we have a one. And you see, the reason why it's called sum of products is because if you were to look at this as a base 10 equation, well, here's our products, right? Each term, because these are all ANDed together, which is a logical multiplication. And then each of those ANDed terms is then being OR, which looks like we're summing. Right? So again, multiplication and addition is not happening here, right? Because ANDing and ORing is happening. But if you just view it as a base 10 equation, that's where the name sum of products comes from. Okay, so does that make sense? Does everybody? If you put a bar, it means we don't have it because it corresponds to a 0 in the truth table. See right here, if you look at this expression, it's not C because for this row, C is 0, it's G because G is 1, it's not S, but that's 0. So yeah, if it has a not, it corresponds to a 0 in the truth table. Okay. We could also write an SOP equation for not E. See, not E is when output E equals 0. Okay, so now to get an SOP for not E, I'm just looking at the rows of the truth table where the E output is 0. So we have a term not C, not G, not S, right? Because I'm not going to eat it. We don't have anything to eat. I'm also not going to eat it if we only have salsa. Right? I'm also not going to eat it if it's chips and eggs. And I'm not going to eat it if we have all 3 of them. Okay, so you see that would be the SOP for not eat. Okay? So everybody see what I'm doing here? Everybody's good? No questions? Okay, because now it's going to get a little bit more interesting, if you will. Because now there's another form, in addition to SOP, sum of products, there's another form called POS. Let's see, we'll write POS over here somewhere. Okay, POS stands for product of sums. And I'm going to show you how to get a POS equation. And in order to show you that, we have to talk about this law, okay, De Morgan's. And that's one of the laws that's on that handout. Okay, so De Morgan's there's actually 2 parts to De Morgan. Okay, one part of it is a NOR gate is the same as, so equals an AND gate with inverted inputs. Okay, so that's how you would say it in a word. A NOR gate equals an AND gate with inverted inputs. You could also use symbols. Oops, that's not a NOR. You have to use symbols. Remember, the NOR gate looks like this. It equals an AND with inverters on the inputs. Now that's only half of De Morgan's. There's 2 parts to De Morgan's. This is one part. The other part of De Morgan's is that a NAND gate is equal to an OR gate. Oh, actually, let me write out the words first, then I'll do the symbols. So a NAND gate is equal to an OR gate with inverted inputs. Okay, so in symbols, here's our NAND gate symbol. That's equal to an OR with inverters on the inputs. Okay, so that's what De Morgan's is. Like I said, De Morgan's has two parts to it. Now, we're going to apply De Morgan's to go from SOP form into POS form. Okay, so what we're gonna do next is we're going to determine POS for output E. Okay. Now, this next line is very important. Just take my word for it for now, and then you'll see why when we get finished here. Okay, but an important thing you always got to remember is that if we want POS for output E, we're going to start with SOP for not E. Okay, so you want POS for E, but in order to do that, and you'll see the reason why in probably like 10 minutes or so, we got to start with SOP for not E. So you see, we're going to start with this expression that we got for the truth table, where the zeros were our output. Okay? All right, first thing. The first thing we have to do is not both sides of this equation. So we're going to not this side and not this side. Not the whole each side. Well, when you have a double not over one variable like this, they cancel out. So this is just going to become E. This we're just going to leave the same. I'm going to just rewrite what's up here down here. Okay, I'm not going to change anything. Please, if I do change something, let me know, because that would be a mistake. All right, so you see I'm just copying what I have up here. Okay, so I just copied this down, but like I said, this cancels out, we just get E. All right, so look at what we have here. And look at our Boolean expression for a NOR gate, right? What we said earlier, a NOR gate, right? The inputs get ORed together, then the whole thing gets knotted. Well, look, if you take this as an input, this as an input, this as an input, and this as an input, those inputs are being ORed together, and then the whole thing's being knotted. So do you see that this expression right here, this is a NOR gate. It's a NOR gate with inputs, not C, not G, not S, not C, not D, S, BG, not C, or CG, not S, and CGS. Okay, so does everybody see that if this is an input, this is an input, this is an input, this is an input, these inputs are all being ORed, and then the whole thing knotted. Okay. Well, De Morgan's tells us a NOR gate is the same as an AND gate with the inputs inverted. So if I take each one of these inputs and I invert them and then AND them together, I end up with an equivalent expression. Right? So you see, I can write this as this. I take this input, invert the whole thing, then AND it with, so I'm using the dot for AND here, with this input inverted, ANDed with, it's not a dot, I carried away there. And do the same thing here, ANDed with this input inverted, and then AND it with this input inverted. So you see, to go from here to here, we did De Morgan's. Okay, specifically, we did this part of De Morgan's. The NOR gate is equal to an AND gate with inverted inputs. What is POS? Oh, POS stands for product of sums. And when we finish what we're about to do here, we're going to do one more step. You'll see more explicitly what it is. Okay? All right, but I just want to make sure, I mean, everybody sees what we did here, right? That this expression is a NOR gate expression, and then we're using this part of the Morgans to get this equation. And now we have to do one more step to get into POS. Okay, because now if you look at this expression here, and you just look at each one of these terms, okay, and remember what a NAND gate Boolean expression looks like, right? It's the terms ANDed and then the whole thing NOTed. So look, if you just look at just one of these terms, like if you just look at this term here, look, input not C is ANDed with input not G, which is ANDed with input not S, and then they're all inverted, right? Same thing here. This input ANDed with this input, ANDed with that input, and the whole thing inverted, right? Same thing here, same thing here. So you see how each term is a NAND gate? See, this is a NAND, this is a NAND, this is a NAND, this is a NAND. Right, if everybody agree? And now what we can do, and by doing this step here, we'll end up with POS, as you'll see in a minute, is we can use this part of the Morgans, that a NAND gate is equal to an OR gate with the inputs inverted. So, you know, the inputs to my NAND gate is not C, not G, not S here, not C, not G, S here, C, G, not S, C, G, S. So looking at this one here, I take each input inverted, so I'm going to get C, G, and S, and I OR them together. So it's going to be C ORed with G ORed with S. And that's going to be ANDed with what we have over here, which is going to be C OR G OR not S. And that's going to be ANDed with not C ORed with not G ORed with S. And then that's going to be ANDed with not C ORed with not G ORed with not S. And this is still equal to E. Right, so you see what I'm doing? I'm taking each input to the NAND gate, inverting it, and ORing them together. Right, and that's this part of the Morgans. So now look at what we end up with. We end up with these variables being ORed, and then they're all being ANDed. So this is product of sums. Right, here are the sums, and ANDing all the sums together, that's the product. So you see, this is POS for E. Now, compare, because remember, we started with the SOP for not E to get the POS for E. Remember, that's what I said at the start, right? We want to get POS for E, which is what we ended up with. But in order to do that, we have to start with the SOP for not. And if you were just to look at this equation and this equation, just pretend like we didn't do any of this, right? Just look at what we started with and what we ended up with. Can you see a pattern here? Do you see where you could quickly go from this SOP for not E to this POS for E? How could you quickly go without doing the derivation?
Just invert all the different variables and then switch the multiplication to plus.
Yeah, exactly. To go from SOP to POS, and for that matter, to go POS to SOP, because you can go both directions, you just invert everything, change pluses to, you know, ORs to ANDs and ANDs to ORs. Right? You see how if you compare this to this, right? The E got inverted, CGS got inverted, CGS got inverted, right? All this got inverted. These ANDs went to ORs, and these ORs went to ANDs. Okay? So, you know, it's just this one time that I show the derivation, just so you know where it comes from. But in this class, you can go directly from SOP to POS or from POS to SOP just by doing what we just said. Just invert everything, change ors to ands and ands to ors. Okay, but I wanted to show you the derivation. Okay, just so you don't think it's magic. Okay, unless you think the Morgan's might be, I don't know, the Morgan might have been. But anyway, that's POS. But
Wait, so you just like take all of the time, so like take out all just multiply everything and then just add out the bar with the bar with the zero, like the R with zero.
Well, it's just that when you go between the two forms, everything gets inverted. So, yeah, whatever variable was equal to a 1 will now be 0. Whatever was 0 will be 1. But the important thing to remember is logically these are the same, like they give the same truth table. So they're logically equivalent. They're just different forms. And they're not the only forms, because next week we even show a few other different forms. And you see, the reason why it's good to know like different forms of expressing logic is because the smaller an equation is, like the less terms you have, corresponds to less circuitry. So in this case, because of the truth table, I mean, they're the same because they both have 4 terms where you got 3 variables in each of the terms. But you could have a case where one of the forms gave you less terms. And you have less terms, it's less circuitry. So that's the advantage of knowing both. Okay, so let's see, we just have logic, circuit diagrams, timing diagrams, black box diagrams, system parallel code. These won't take long at all. I can probably finish this in about 15 minutes. This was where most of the time was going to be. We just completed that. So would you rather I take another 15 minutes to finish, or do you want to take a break? Break or finish? Okay, finish. Somebody said finish, so I'll go with what I heard. All right, so let's do logic circuit diagram, and this is the logic circuit diagram for SOP and POS. So let's start with the diagram for SOP. So, as an example, we can take this SOP for output E. Well, look, this term has these inputs all ANDed together. This term has these inputs all ANDed together. This term has these inputs all ANDed together. And this term's all ANDed together. And those terms that are ANDed together are then OR. So how many AND gates do you think we're going to have in our logic diagram? Like how are we going to make this? Like if you just look at this term right here, what are we going to use to make this? What gates? Say that again.
2 AND gates.
For just this term here? Because you can have AND gates with more than 2 inputs. Like if you're only going to use a 2 input AND gate, then yeah, it would take 2 AND gates. But if I have more than 2 inputs for AND gate, then how many AND gates? Yeah, so you would just need 1 3 input AND gate for that one. See, it would look like this. You have an AND gate with 3 inputs where one input is not C, one input is G, and the third input is not S. Right? So at the output of this AND gate, you would have not C, G, not S. So you would have this term. Right? So 1 3 input AND gate for this term. What do we need for this term? 1 3 input AND gate. What about this one? 1 3 input AND gate, right? All these terms need 3 input AND gates. So we're going to have 4 3 input AND gates. Right? And I would just write the inputs like we did for this one, right? So I'll do one more here. Not C, Was it not C, G, and S? Right? And then this one would be what, C, not GS, or C, not G, not S. And then that would be C, not G, S. Right, and then the output here would be not C, G, S. This would be C, not G, not S. This would be C, not G, S. If I make a mistake, let me know. But then what are we gonna have to do with all these inputs of these AND gates? Because what is this equation doing to each of these terms? For all these terms, it's ORing them all together. So the outputs of these AND gates would all go to one OR gate. You know, the OR gate would need 4 inputs. Right, so at the output, that's where we would have our SOP equation. Right, so does everybody see how that diagram corresponds to this equation? Right, you need AND gates for these terms, and then you need an OR gate to OR all the terms together. All right, okay, if that makes sense, then you should be able to tell me what the logic diagram for POS would look like. Right? Here's the POS equation. What would the POS diagram look like? Because what's happening to each of these terms? What kind of gate is needed here? Or, and then what? And so what is the POS going to look like compared to the SOP? Yeah, it's just the swapping, right? SOP has multiple AND gates in a single OR gate. POS has multiple OR gates in a single AND gate, right? Because each of the terms you need an OR gate, and then all the terms are ANDed together. Right? So your POS is just going to be, you know, for that equation there, it's just going to be 4 OR gates. You know, 3 input OR gates. 3, 1, 3, 3, 1, 3. And then the outputs of the ORs are just going to go to the AND. And here will be your expression for POS. Okay, so just by looking at a logic diagram, you can tell whether you have SOP or POS, right? SOP, multiple ANDs, 1 OR. POS, multiple ORs, 1 AND. Okay? All right, timing diagram. Okay, and that's why I have these square waves up here. You know, a digital signal, a bit, is a square wave, right? Because a square wave only has 2 possible values, just like a bit does. So, you know, when a square wave is low, that's a 0. When it's high, it's a 1. And let's say, you know, this is my S bit of my truth table over to the left, and this is my G bit, and this is my C bit. Now, where timing diagrams in this class are particularly important is you use timing diagrams to verify whether your design in Vivado is working properly, right? If it's working 100% like it should. And what you're doing is you're looking at that timing diagram and seeing if it corresponds with your truth table. Okay, so that's what we'll do here. We'll see if, well, actually, we'll come up with the output E that agrees with our truth table. So if you look at the first row of the truth table, when all inputs are 0, output E would be 0. So you see in this timing diagram, you know, right here during this time interval from here to here, that's when all our inputs are 0. So if our output is correct, it agrees with our truth table, well, our output E should also be 0 during that time when S, G, and C are all 0. Okay, then when S goes to 1 and C and G are still 0, so that would be during like this time interval here. Like I'm just drawing a line through the center, but you know, it'd be during this entire time when S is equal to 1. Well, E is still 0, right? So this should still be 0. Now, output E should go to a 1 when we have no cell set, we do have eggs, and we don't have chips. So that would be during this time here. Right, see, during this time here, S is 0, G is 1, C is 0. So you see the minute that this G input goes high, that's when our E output should go high. Okay, and I could keep going, but that's what you would do. You would look at each time interval where you have, you know, your input values, and you would just make sure that the output agrees with your truth table for that input combination. Right, so once this output goes high, it's going to stay high until we reach, let's see, when we have C, G, and not S. So see, actually right here, when we have chips and we have eggs but no salsa, that's when it would go back to 0. Let's see, actually right at this point. And see, he would just stay high until here, and then it would go to 0. Okay? But this is exactly how you have to be thinking when you're doing the labs and you're checking your simulation in Vivado to make sure that your design is giving you the truth table that you intended. Okay? All right, black box diagram. You can put that right here. A black box diagram just shows you the main inputs and main outputs of your design. So as an example, you know, again, using the breakfast example there. In fact, you should always give your black box a name. So I'll call this breakfast. Aries breakfast. And then on the left side, usually we show the inputs, although sometimes you have inputs on the top and bottom. Just depends on how many inputs you have. But you know, we show our inputs, chips, eggs, salsa, and we would show our output. Outputs usually go on the right side. So if there's single bit like what we have in this example, then you just show it as you see here. But you're going to see that eventually we're going to get to inputs and outputs that have more than one bit. Okay, they're going to have multiple bits. And if you have an input or output that has more than one bit, you show it by putting a slash with the number of bits. So if this input C was a 4-bit input, that's how we would show it, /4. You know, if this output was 8 bits, we put /8. Okay, so the only time you don't put a slash is when it's a single bit. And it's incorrect to put a /1, which some people do sometimes. That's, yeah, if you put a /1, somebody's going to think you made an error that you meant it was something other than 1. All right, last thing, how to write in System Verilog as far as, you know, or, and not. In System Verilog, and this is the same for Verilog also. In System Verilog, not is the tilde. Okay, tilde is the key that's to the left of the 1 key, and you got to do a shift because it's the upper on that key. Now later, and I'm just mentioning this just as a heads up. Later, you're going to see that for a particular a particular construct of coding in Verilog, that also an exclamation point means not. But for what we're doing in lab 0 and from lab 0 all the way out till probably about lab 4 or so, you're always going to use a tilde for not. Okay, and in System Verilog is that ampersand. That's the symbol above 7, I think, on the keyboard. Yeah, it's that ampersand. Okay, and then or is a vertical line. Okay, because plus in Verilog means add, so you can't use plus. That's why it's the vertical line. So, as an example, if you wanted to write, say, this equation, this SOP equation in Verilog, when you're doing your lab work. Now you're not going to be doing this example for lab 0. It's a different example, but the approach is the same. that when you do an SOP, you would first type in assign. Okay, and then you would put what you call the output. So here we would just put E, and then you would put equal. Now, I like to put all my terms in parentheses. You don't necessarily have to. I would do. So I would put parentheses, and then for not C, you would put tilde C. Okay, so the tilde goes before the variable that's getting knotted, or the input that's getting knotted. And then it would have to be ampersand. Okay, because if you don't put anything, like if you just put two variables next to each other, it's not going to know what to do. Okay, that will be an error. So you actually have to put the ampersand. And then it would be G ampersand tilde S. And then I would put parentheses. And then for or, it's going to be a vertical line. That's the let's see, what key is that? That's the key that's got the backward slash. So you'd have to do a shift in that because the vertical line is the top one. And then you would just keep going. You know, your next term would be in parentheses, and another vertical line for or, then parentheses. And then you would end it with a semicolon. All right, so I did one here, but you would put the same, you know, it's the same idea in each one of these parentheses for each one of these terms. That's a semicolon, not a J. It's like a J. Okay. All right, so that's all the lecture. Now, let me just point out where the activity is on Canvas. It's under Meeting2. Wake up the computer. The computer probably went to sleep. Again, on the screen here, the resolution's not going to be that good, but you know, look at it on your computer. So there's two parts to the activity. The first part is you start off with a Boolean expression. I give you an SOP for F. Now, I couldn't do a bar in Word, so I used a little tick mark. So like this first term, it's U, V tick mark W. So that's the same as U, not V, W. Okay, so if it's a not, the tick mark comes after the variable. Okay. So yeah, I give you an SOP equation, and from that SOP equation, I want you to get the truth table. So in the example, we went truth table to equation. I'm asking you to go from equation to truth table, right, the other way. And then the circuit diagram, okay, that's the same as the logic diagram that we just went over a few moments ago. And then also the Verilog code. And then write the POS for F. Okay, so since you're going to write the POS for F, you start with what? SOP for nada. Just like we said earlier. Again, that's, I don't know if I mentioned earlier, but even if I did, it's worth repeating. The most common mistake that people make here is that instead of starting with the inverse, they start with the thing. So again, if you want POS for E, you need to start with SOP for not. A mistake that a lot of people make is they want to get POS for E and they start with SOP for E. But that will give you POS for not E. So it'd be like the inverse. Okay. All right, so that's the first part of it. The second part of it is there's a diagram. Now the diagram's not on the sheet, but I put it up here on the whiteboard. Okay, so the diagram that you start with for number 2 to get the truth table and the expression, the Verilog code, it's up here on the whiteboard. And then the solution, my solution is up here. I have it taped to the wall. Okay? All right, last thing, and you can get started on your work, is I just want to point out on Canvas, and I sort of pointed this out last time, but I don't think I talked about it in a lot of detail. I just went over what you need to turn in and you know, what the points are for the lab work. But see this, right here, this lab demo criteria document. When you open that up, it goes into more detail. I mean, it has the same, you know, what you turn in, what the points are. But it talks about, you know, making sure that what you turn in is readable. And like when you make the video, make sure that, you know, the grader can see like the switch positions. You know, make sure that you cover all the inputs. Like in your lab 0, you have 8 different inputs in your truth table. So make sure you show all 8, because if you show 7, that's not 100% working, because we're not going to know if it worked for that one input that you didn't show. All right. So a lot of making these videos, like a lot of things in engineering, you know, not only videos, but just work, is just being meticulous, just making sure you're covering everything. And that's why having 2 people in a group is good. I highly recommend that you don't just have one person making the video. Like have both people there, because if you have 2 people, it's less likely you're going to miss something. You know, I was in the Air Force, you know, this is years ago, it feels like a lifetime ago. But the job I had in the Air Force, a lot of what we did was uploading software to a satellite. And we would have 3 people check what we were uploading before it got uploaded. And that was just to make sure somebody didn't miss something. And I can't tell you how many times it was the 3rd person that caught something that the first 2 people missed. You know, it's very easy to miss stuff. So that's why it's good to have a person to check, at least one person. Okay. So make sure you look at this document, because it's got a lot of good advice and tips in there, how to make a video where, you know, you won't lose points unnecessarily. Okay, so any questions before you get going? Because at this point you have enough information to do the activity, just like last time, and this goes for the whole quarter. When you're done with the activity, get everybody's name at the table on it, put the table number, turn it in before you go. And then, like I said before, I don't require people to stay here to do the lab. Now, you have to stay here until your table is done for the activity. But after that, if you want to go work somewhere else on the lab, that's perfectly okay. All right, and today, don't leave until you know your group. So I'll give you till 4:30 to put your group up there, the names if you know. If not, I'm going to start assigning groups at 4:30. Okay? Great. And Blake should be here at 5. You have a question?
Yeah. How, so you said there's bases here?
Yeah.
How, is the room always open?
Well, oh, did I forget to mention this, that here's the door code, you know, the lock on the door, this is the code for it. So, you know, take a picture of this or write it down somewhere, because then as long as the building is open, you'll be able to get into this room. Right, and, you know, during the week, the building is open basically from 6 in the morning until 9 at night. Now, even if there's a class in here, if the class is not using the back benches, if you ask the professor, just like those guys, you know, I let people work in the back as long as they're quiet. Now, once you get to the lab part, I'm going to ask them to leave because we need it. But, you know, if my class is not using the back, you know, I'll let students use it during class, and most instructors will. Okay. Yeah, so yeah, just write your names up there if you know what your groups are. Like I said, I'm gonna start assigning groups at 4:30. So if you got somebody you're gonna be a partner with, I would put it up there now.